student here, and I just finished up my, are you all from around this area? No? Or yes or no, but I just finished my first block placement at Skyline Middle School, and I'm now at Stonewall Jackson High School out in Shenandoah County, so it's quite the difference there. So, but anyway, so to start off, so we all are millennials, is our generation. So if you've all seen that kind of Time article about what the general characteristics of the millennials are, it's not exactly very flattering. We're self-obsessed, technology-obsessed, all those kinds of things. But there's also kind of this myth that we're kind of one of the first post-racial generations, which is absolutely not true, but it's kind of one of these things that gets thrown around a lot. They're like, oh, we're obsessed with selfies, sure, but we're also very tolerant. But actually, I think a lot of studies have just shown that we're no more tolerant than our previous generation, so Generation X. Millennials are no more tolerant. But maybe even more concerning is that when you compare non-white millennials and white millennials in the terms of how much work they think needs to be done in order to increase equality in America, it's huge. The difference is astronomical. So white millennials specifically think that we live in this kind of post-racial society where everything's fine. We've got a black president, so like no problems, everything's going great. Whereas non-white millennials, obviously, they experience those things much more often, so they know of these inequalities on a daily basis. So my thought is, and how do I, as a social studies teacher, how do we break that cycle? How can we make it so, yeah, sure, maybe we're tolerant, but how can we be also active in fighting these things? So what's the next generation, and how can I, as this millennial, get into this next generation, not only make them tolerant, or let's go past tolerance, let's make them active people crusading against social injustice and those kinds of things. So in the CDA program was really, really great in kind of planting a lot of these different seeds. Because I never spent a lot of time working with immigrants. I never spent a lot of time meeting with a lot of people from cultures that are very different from myself. I think we all know JMU is kind of lacking in a lot of diversity. I went to a high school that was lacking in a lot of diversity. So it was pretty much the first time that I got to experience a lot of these narratives coming from people themselves. I think it was either Professor Schick or Dr. Kood mentioned that Eritreans were an up-and-coming immigrant population. I had never met someone from Eritrea before. So that was a very cool experience to get to talk to him about his experiences of why they want to come over here. It's very, very fascinating. And then actually I ran into a student in my first placement who was from Eritrea. He was really impressed I knew where Eritrea was. So that was pretty nice. But the CDA, it's incredibly diverse, and it teaches you a lot because they are in a wide variety of age. We have students who I think were in like their early 20s, maybe even some still teenagers, I think, maybe.
Yes.
And then some students were in their 70s, so that was pretty impressive. There are different levels of education. We had students who may have been lawyers in their previous countries, and then those who had very little formal education, reading level, like all other sorts of different problems that we encounter in our placements out in the field as teachers. So that was a great experience. But I think the best experience was getting to know these students on kind of that personal level that simply can't happen in kind of a formal learning setting, excuse me. So I could read a book about a person from Eritrea and their experience in America, and that might touch me and it might inspire me, but it's really not going to do the same thing as actually talking to someone from Eritrea, like maybe hearing the pain in their voice, or the excitement in their voice of being somewhere where they feel safe. Completely different experience. Which is really, really great to have as a teacher going out, especially if I'm entering into an area which is diverse and I have to teach diverse students. It's great to have that experience, to be able to talk to students and relate to their experiences, knowing kind of this commonality of experience between people who come to America. I think one of the most interesting, during my, like I just said, I just had a placement at Skyline Middle School, and we were in the computer lab and kids were kind of doing independent work. I noticed these two kids were off task, so I kind of snuck up behind them to kind of see what they were doing, that little teacher method. And it was a student from Mexico and a student from Iraq, and they were arguing about whose government was most incompetent back at home. And I just listened, and I was like, oh, this is certainly not the conversation I was having when I was in middle school. Like, let me tell you, this is incredible to be able to listen to this. And it's such a cool experience that these kids who go to school with them, I'm sure they don't appreciate that at their level, which is okay, but as a teacher trying to prod it along. So it's just a very cool thing to do. And how do we get the other students to buy into those stories, listen to those stories, kind of spread that diversity. But also extremely important if I'm going into an area where I am now in my placement, which is extremely not diverse, right? So we have, I think in this current placement, it's probably 90% white, something like that. A lot of the non-white population is Hispanic, and a lot of them are in ESL classrooms, kind of secluded from the general school population, which is very unfortunate. So then you wonder, how do you teach diversity to people who have never encountered diversity? Which is really, really hard, right? So that would have been me in high school, never really have encountered diversity. So how do you teach those people? And I think having that background of working with these people really, really helps in that kind of scenario, because you have to have, the passion for the subject that you're teaching, and you have to have like the emotional buy-in and the understanding. How can I teach about Eritrea if all I've ever done is read about Eritrea, right? It might be fascinating to me intellectually or that kind of thing, but it's not exactly that kind of emotional response that we want from people. It's not the compassionate response that we want from our students. We can't break these cycles if we're just going to be continuing to teach just kind of what we've read and all those kinds of things without those experiences of different immigrants and things like that. So in that regard, I thought the CDA was a really, really tremendous experience in preparing me for what I was going to encounter on the schools.
Thanks, Spencer.